is coming for the heart that holds on. And there will be an end to these troubles, but until that day comes, still I will praise you. Still I will praise you. Oh no, you never let go. Through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go. In every high and every low. Oh, you never let go. Lord, you never let go of me. In need of grace, in need of love, in need of mercy raining down from high above, in need of strength, in need of peace, in need of things that only you can give to me. In need of Christ, the perfect Lamb, my refuge strong, the great I am. This is my song, my humble plea. I am your child, I am in need. In need of grace, in need of love, in need of mercy raining down from high above, in need of strength, in need of peace, in need of things that only you can give to me. In need of Christ, the perfect Lamb, my refuge strong, the great I am. This is my song, my humble plea. I am your child, I am in need. In need of Christ, the perfect Lamb, my refuge strong, the great I am. This is my song, my humble plea. I am your child, I am in need. I am your child, I am in need. I still have joy, I still have joy, after all the things we've been through. I still have joy,
And I still have
I still have joy, I still have joy, after all the things we've been through. I still have joy,
I still have
peace, I still have peace, after all the things we've been through. I still have peace,
and I still have
I still have faith, I still have faith, after all the things we've been through. I still have faith, I still have hope,
still have hope.
I still have hope, after all the things we've been through. I still have hope,
I still have
love,
sweet love.
I still have love, after all the things we've been through. I still have Every praise is to our God. Every word of worship with one accord. Every praise is to our God. Sing hallelujah to our God. Glory, hallelujah is to our God. Every praise is to our God. Every praise is to our God. Every word of worship with one accord. Every praise is to our God. Sing hallelujah to our God. Glory, hallelujah is to our God. Every praise is to our God. God my Savior, God my healer, God my deliverer. Yes, He is. Yes, He is. God my Savior, God my healer, God my deliverer. Yes, He is. Yes, He is. Yes, He is. God my Savior, God my healer, God my deliverer. Yes, He is. Yes, He is. Yes, He is. Every praise is to our God. Every word of worship with one accord. Every praise is to our God. Sing hallelujah to our God. Glory, hallelujah is to our God. Every praise is to our God. When I'm down, Lord, you pick me up. Then I fall on my knees. When I'm dry, Lord, you fill my cup. You always give what I need, and yours, Lord, I'll always be. When everything's right, I will praise you. In seasons of joy, I will sing, and even in trials, I'll still praise you. For you are my glorious King. Yes, you are my glorious King. When I'm up and blessings abound, and your grace falls like rain. When your love and mercy surround, Lord, I will praise you again. My God, Redeemer and friend. When everything's right, I will praise you. In seasons of joy, I will sing, and even in trials, I'll still praise you. For you are my glorious King. Yes, you are my glorious King. You came for me in the form of a man, bearing my sins on a cross, taking the shame and fulfilling.
Good evening. Welcome to the Lost River Church of Christ live stream. I'm really glad that you're joining us. I'm really glad that you can tune in tonight. I want to look at Ecclesiastes tonight. We're going to look at a few different chapters, a few different sections, not entire chapters, but a few different sections from a few chapters of Ecclesiastes. And I really hope that you'll follow along in your Bible. So if you're at home without a Bible, go and grab one or look one up on your phone. And I think it'd be really helpful for us to read these things together tonight. The book of Ecclesiastes is one of my favorites because it's so thought-provoking, and it really is challenging to me. No matter how many times I look at the wisdom that is given in this book, no matter how many times I listen to the messages of this preacher, I always question whether or not I really am grasping everything he's trying to tell me. And it's no exception that preparing for this lesson is the same way. I go through these sections and I read these sections again, and I'm like, man, I hope I understand this like I'm supposed to. And that's my goal tonight, overall, ultimately with this, anytime we study the Bible together, anytime I try to lead a thought in a Bible study or a lesson, I humbly hope that all of us look at this honestly from our own perspectives, praying to God that he would help us to see what he wants us to see in it. That we would understand the wisdom he's trying to give us to live a life that is full of his wisdom. Because we're going to read a verse tonight that talks about how wisdom is like money in the sense that it offers life, in a sense. It offers good protection for your life. And God's wisdom, more than any wisdom, because God's wisdom is the true wisdom, will help us live a life that is full and protected and good, like we're all wanting to. But the book of Ecclesiastes also has a very, maybe depressing undertone, a depressing message throughout, or a depressing tone. It can seem bleak at times. If you've read it, have you noticed that? Have you seen that in the book of Ecclesiastes? That sometimes it can feel bleak. And as I've wrestled with that, I don't think that it's aiming at being overly bleak or just being pessimistic or looking at the world and thinking, man, things are just awful and there's not much that can be done about that. That's not the point. But like the book of Ecclesiastes starts out, it references Solomon, and it very well seems to be written from Solomon's perspective of ruling in Jerusalem and having all this money, all this wealth, all this wisdom, all this knowledge, this authority. And the preacher in Ecclesiastes sets off to examine life, as he says, under the sun. What's the purpose of life here? It's very existential, we might say. He's really pondering his existence. Like, what is the point of life here on earth? What do we do with it? What do we do with today? What do we do with tomorrow? How do I look at my week, my life? What's the value of my work or my money or my relationships even? And I want to start in Ecclesiastes 9, which I know is not the beginning of Ecclesiastes, we're starting in the middle to some degree. But I want to start maybe one of the bleakest points of Ecclesiastes, and I want you to stay with me through the bleakness, because I think through this thought we're going to lead somewhere, the Ecclesiastes, the preacher leads somewhere that really is helpful, and helpful in having happiness and joy and contentment with the days that we have, regardless to some degree of our circumstances. And we'll get there. But look here in Ecclesiastes 9 and just read verse 1 to start off with. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 1. The preacher says, "For I have taken all this to my heart, and explain it that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred. Anything awaits him." Stop there for a moment. Maybe this seems obvious, especially if we're reading in the Bible. A lot of Ecclesiastes has looked at life without God. That's what he means by life under the sun. But there's these few glimmers where it seems like the preacher can't help but talk about God's existence and God's interaction with people, with us in our lives. And this is one of them where he's looking around at life and he says, I've taken all these things I've been talking about to my heart, and this is how I explain it, that righteous and wise men, even our deeds, everything, it's in the hand of God. And what he means is that we don't really know what's coming. Our lives are in the hands of God like a bird, a fragile little bird. It's like he could do whatever he wants. And really our life could go right or left, north or south tomorrow. And we don't know. And maybe, again, sometimes when I talk about especially wisdom, I feel like the things I'm saying are obvious. He talks about not knowing whether love or hatred, anything awaits. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. We don't know whether or not to dress for snow or dress for sun. But continue on reading in verse 2 and see what he keeps on saying in this section. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 2. He goes on to say, "It is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, and for the unclean. for the man who offers a sacrifice and for the one who does not sacrifice. As the good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all men. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterwards they go to the dead. For whoever is joined with all the living, there is hope. Surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have they any longer a reward, for their memory is forgotten. Indeed, their love, their hate, and their zeal have already perished, and they will no longer have a share in all that is done under the sun. Like I said, it's bleak, right? The preacher is examining a truth about our lives that is unavoidable, that we like to put to the back of our minds. You know, there's two things that we can't avoid: death and taxes, right? Thankfully, he's not talking about taxes, but he's talking about death, which may be a little bit preferable of the two. But again, it's not something we like to think about. It's something we try not to think about. We actively live our lives not trying to remember that I'm trying to forget that I'm going to die one day. But there is, I think, and what I wanted to start here in Ecclesiastes, there is this intrinsic value in appreciating, at least for a little bit, starting with this thought that one day I'm not going to be here anymore. One day I'm not going to have any more days to live, any more choices to make, any more thoughts to think here on earth. And so what am I going to do with the days that I do have? And it's interesting how he puts it. You know, it doesn't matter if you're righteous or wicked or a sacrificer or not a sacrificer, the good, the bad, the ugly, the evil, everyone. There is one fate, and he calls it an evil. And certainly life without God under the sun here on earth, it can feel like an evil truth that one day I can't avoid this fact. I can't outrun death. And there's a lot of difficult things he says in here, but one of the interesting things is once he moves on from this point, in chapter 9, verse 4, he says, whoever is joined with all the living, there is hope. And he says this very proverbial thing, you know, a live dog is better than a dead lion. I think it's hard for us to articulate or to understand what they say, what the Old Testament writers meant when they said dog a lot of times. I don't think it was the dog of today in America, 21st century America, where we have them in our house on our laps right now as we're watching the live stream, you know, throwing the toy and having them fetch it back for us and feeding them crumbs from our table. I'm not sure if that's exactly the picture they had. To me, I think more of a raccoon or a possum, like a garbage-eating, like scavenger in the streets. And maybe even if you want to keep it confined to like 21st century North America for us to understand this analogy, maybe we could say that a live raccoon is better than a dead bear, a dead grizzly bear. I think that's like majestic, big, mighty, powerful animal. Even so, what's the point? What does he mean that it's better to be a live dog or a live raccoon, maybe if we want to say that, than a dead lion? And I love this analogy because it's just so, it's real. He says that if you're living, even if you are this dog, there's hope. For the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have any longer reward, for their memory is forgotten. I think as the preacher examined all the ins and outs of life, and as he tried to take ideas to their furthest, he started to see that it can really easy to get down to these trains of thoughts and really get down on ourselves and start to think about what's the purpose of it all? Where am I at? What's going on? What am I doing here? And what am I doing with my life? What's the value of it? Especially a life that is looked at without God's hand in it, actively, without knowing or appreciating God's hand in it. But he looks at this and he says, look, once you're gone, you're gone. And he goes on in verse 6, says that after you're gone, the memory's forgotten. Indeed, your love, the hate, the zeal of that person is already perished with them. And this, again, is another evil. It's another sad truth. It's another hard truth to look at. The fact that once someone is gone, everything that they brought with them goes with them. It's one of the fascinating things about people and our relationships is that certain people bring out different sides of us. It's funny as I've, moved a lot and I've had friends in different places, and the friendships that I've kept up with, I have distinct friendships with a couple different people, and they bring out very different sides of me. And I'm a different person. I think more about one thing with one person. I talk more about this thing with the other person. And it becomes this really interesting thing. And I value both of those friendships so equally and so much in my life. But the person I am, the things I talk about, the joys and the laughs and the good times and the memories with one person is so different than with the other. Or even the most precious of relationships we have, if we're married and the joy that comes from a close relationship, there are sides of me that only Haley sees. And this is one of the hard things to think, especially we would see this if we've moved or if friendships have gone by the wayside as time has gone on, that it's an interesting thing that with that distance or with that loss, there comes not just loss of a person, but a loss of love and passion and zeal and all these things that come with it. And the conclusion in one sense in this section is that it's just better to be alive. And this isn't true in the Christian life. Again, like looking at life under the sun, separate from God, it's not true that if we're looking forward to heaven and life with God, that it's better to be there than to be here. But I think examining life from this wisdom perspective of what is the goodness of my life, there is a lot of good to live. There's hope, and it's better to be a live dog than a dead lion. It's better. It's better to have the ability to change things and to operate and to live and to work. Because there's a lot of things there's a lot of benefit you can bring. There's a lot of love and hatred and zeal that you're bringing to the table that will be missed. And sometimes at our darkest moments or when things are really tough, we can tend to forget this. And this is what I mean about why it's important to think about this to get to the encouraging and good thoughts. To start with maybe the difficult, bleak thoughts to get to the encouraging thoughts is because we don't necessarily imagine that once things are different, like we can't imagine, how much will be missed about that. How much of the change won't be positive for some people and some things. And what that means for us now is that there is good for me today to do. There is good for me to exist and to benefit others and to be in other people's lives. And even for my own life, there is good to be lived out with the hours I have left in this day and hopefully maybe tomorrow as well. There's good things. There's hope. Look, continue on down to verse 11. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 11. We'll get to these verses in the middle, but I want to skip down to verse 11 for now. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 11, he says, "Again, I saw under the sun that the race is not always to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, and neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability, for time and chance overtake them all. Moreover, man does not know his time, like fish caught in a treacherous net and birds trapped in a snare. So the sons of men are ensnared in an evil time when it suddenly falls on them." And then the thoughts get more difficult, right? It's the worst part about all this that we think about life, existence on this planet, existence in life as we go through it, is that life isn't fair either. The battle isn't always won by the strongest person. The race isn't always won by the fastest person. The time and chance overtake everything. The reason that these things are important to think about and to ponder a bit for us is because we can really believe these things and believe that life ought to be fair. And so we go through life thinking, well, life should be fair. And therefore, when life isn't fair, it totally throws off our plans and totally throws off what we're hoping. And I was hoping that life would be fair. I was hoping that everything would be equal and just and everything would just work out well for me all the time because I'm doing the right things. But as the preacher speaks to us in his wisdom, he says, look, you have to get it into your heads that life isn't always going to be fair. Sometimes you're going to be dealt a bad hand. The dice aren't always going to roll in your favor. The cards aren't always going to come up all aces. It's going to be difficult sometimes, and it's not fair. And again, we're going to live in this bleak thought for just one more minute, and then we'll get to more hopeful things. But we have to appreciate this going in because otherwise, we will make ourselves victims of chance. Make ourselves victims of whatever comes our way, whatever circumstances befall us. If they're not good, then we're done for. If bad things come my way, well, then life is over. Why am I even here? I'm not going to be a joy to be around. I'm not going to be able to handle the difficulties of life. I'm not going to be prepared for what life's going to throw my way if I don't understand that, first of all, life isn't fair. And I think that's why the preacher speaks this way. You know, Ecclesiastes seems to be written from this preacher's perspective, writing to his sons. And he's trying to prepare his kids for life. Proverbs is the same way, preparing the next generation for what life on earth is like. And sometimes I feel like we don't appreciate that we have to go into it knowing the game is rigged and not always in our favor. But look here in the middle of this section, because this is where, we're going to start here in verse 7, and then the rest of the sections of Ecclesiastes, I think, are going to help us see the good and see hope, and help equip us to how we use the days we have. Whether life is fair, or whether life is good to us, or whether life is unfair to us, the rest of the sections of Ecclesiastes we're going to look at are going to help us to see what to do with those. So listen to this. Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 7. In the middle of this, he says, "Go then, eat your bread in happiness, and drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. Let your clothes be white all the time, and let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which he has given to you under the sun. For this is your reward in life, and in your toil which you have labored under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you are going." In the middle of this section, right after he talks about how all people are going to die, and then right before he talks about how life isn't fair, these two very depressing truths that we have to deal with, in the middle of these it says, so hey, go and eat some bread and be happy about it. Well, that's kind of a jarring transition, isn't it? He just talked about how everyone's going to die, and we're going to miss them when they're dead, and it's sad, but then he says, all right, so go and just eat bread and be happy. What's his point? This is what I was meaning, is we have to consider the bleak truths first sometimes. It helps us to realize that there's not much to be done. One fate befalls all people no matter what. So I might as well enjoy this meal that I have today. I might as well enjoy what I have, that God's given me bread to eat, so I'll be happy about it. God's given me maybe white clothes, nice clothes to wear, oil, gel, hairspray to put in my hair, makeup to put on my face. He's given me the ability to look nice and to feel nice, and maybe I should just put that on today and enjoy the day I have ahead of me. It's this really jarring contrast in the middle of these two difficult truths that the preacher just says, all right, so go eat your bread in happiness, drink your wine with a cheerful heart. And I know it's not that simple. I know that wisdom like this is difficult sometimes. It's like, well, I wish I could. And what's even more difficult about this verse, Ecclesiastes 9:7, is that he says, for God has already approved your works. What does that mean? What do you think it means that God's already approved your works? I've thought about this a lot, and I've pondered it a lot. And again, this has been keen trying to ponder this wisdom, and there's probably a lot I don't understand about it still. But in the context of verses 1 through 6, where he talks about how everyone's going to die, and it's in the hand of God whether or not we're alive or dead, whether or not we have life or don't have life, I think when he says that God has already approved your works, it means that if you're living on this planet still, and you still have breath in your body, and you still have existence, then from a certain perspective, God's already approved what you're going to do. It doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. I'm not saying that. But what he's saying is, live your life and enjoy it. God's given you your life to enjoy. And he's given you things in your life to enjoy. And you have to look for them and enjoy them. Sometimes, even if it's not the bread we want, we have bread in front of us, we have to enjoy the meal we have. Enjoy life in verse 9 with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life. If you're married, enjoy life with your spouse. And that's the thing about general wisdom, is maybe not all of us are married, not all of us, have the things that he's talking about, but the point isn't the specifics. The point is the overall. Whatever you have in your life, there's a certain perspective where God's given it to you to enjoy. So get up tomorrow. Put on some nice clothes. Make yourself look nice. Put oil in your hair and your good clothes on. And go into it thinking, I'm going to do what I can to enjoy today. Not so just we can find joy, not so we can just be looking for the good things in life, but just because some things God has given us to enjoy them. And there's more wisdom like this in Ecclesiastes. The next section we're going to look at in Ecclesiastes 11, just a couple chapters later in verse 9, this is more for younger people. And I'm going to say it applies to you if you think you're young. So if you think you're young, then this section of Ecclesiastes 11 applies to you. I'm not going to put barriers on it. But look here in Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and verse 9. Again, this is a verse that I've thought about a lot and I've tried to talk about a lot with people because I think it's really important. Ecclesiastes 11, verse 9, it says, "Rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. Yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So, remove grief and anger from your heart, and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near when you will say, I have no delight in them." If you're a teenager, or you're in your 20s, or even 30s, or again, like I said, if you're just somewhere where you think you're young, listen to this wisdom. The first thing he says is rejoice, young person. Rejoice in being young. Rejoice in these young days of your life, because his point ultimately is life isn't going to get any easier to enjoy. He says even to follow the impulses of your heart, which we don't like to talk this way because verses like Jeremiah, where he talks about how the heart is deceitful, we've trained ourselves to not always trust, which is, there's good to that, but there's this competing wisdom in the Bible, where on one hand our heart is deceitful, but on the other hand there's a certain degree where we have to trust or follow our heart and enjoy life too. And I know this is, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, and this is complex, and I'm right there with you. I think it's complex. He says, he does give a caveat, saying, yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all the things you do. But, he says in verse 10, remove grief and anger from your heart, and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, when you say, I will have no delight in them. The wisdom for younger people in this section, as he says, you have these times, these days in your life, this time in your life where you're young, so enjoy it. The wisdom is that, look, life isn't going to get any easier. He goes on in chapter 12, and he gets really poetic about describing what it feels like, or what it looks like, or what old age is like. That's what a lot of chapter 12 talks about, and it's not, I haven't experienced it yet, but it's not a pretty picture. You start losing the grinders of your teeth. You start to, your back is bent over. No, things don't work like they used to. Your eyes, your ears, things don't work. And the point isn't, things are just going to be glum in the future. But the point is, look, like now things are easier. Life in general, this is general wisdom, is easier to enjoy now than it will be when you're in pain or when you can't understand everything or when you're older necessarily. And I think this is a really important thing, because the wisdom that is given to us, to these young people, is, look, like your days of youth to a certain extent are given to you to enjoy. And I think that's important because so often I think young people, maybe especially young Christians, start to really wrestle with our place in the world, or wrestle with their place in the world. Maybe I'm not young anymore, I don't know. But young Christians start to wrestle with their place in the world and start to say, well, do I need to live here or there? Do I need to get this degree or that degree? Do I need to go down this profession or that profession? Marry this person or that person? When do I need to do that by? By age 22, age 25, age 30? What do I need to do to be pleasing to God? And we start to ask this question, well, what is God's plan for my life? And that's a good question. It's so well-intentioned. It shows a heart that really is wanting to be tuned to God and follow his plan for our life. But I think it's also a little misinformed sometimes, that we might think that God has a specific plan for every little instance of my life, and I have to figure it out to the T, or else I won't be pleasing to God. What the wisdom of Ecclesiastes 11 says to young people is, hey, rejoice in your life and put sadness and vexation and anger and pain away from your life and live the life you want to live, all the while serving God while you do it. Do what you want, but also serve God while you do it. And I think what would happen if young Christians took this to heart is that they would go everywhere, and they would take the joy of the Lord with them, and they would take the gospel with them. And I think maybe I'm reading way too much into this, but there's an ideal in this, I think, possibly, that if young Christians took this to heart, that the gospel would go with them. Regardless of that dream of mine, there is wisdom in here that if you're young, take the days of your youth and enjoy them. all the while remembering God while you're young and serving him and knowing he's going to bring you judgment for it too. But also enjoy it. So that encouragement is for the young people. Look here in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, and this, I think, may be more pointed towards some of the older people. So Ecclesiastes 11 was more towards the young people, but Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 10 might be more directed at some of the older people. Listen to this, Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 10. The preacher says, "Do not say, 'Why is it that the former days were better than these?' For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this." Who generally says stuff like this? Who generally says, well, man, back in the day, gas was a nickel, or milk was a nickel. Things were so much better back in my day. Or they'll say, well, we never did things like this. Things were never this bad when I was young. Nostalgia can really kill our perspective on what is good about life right now. We can really get caught up in saying, well, things are worse than they've ever been. And I think the longer that people live, the more susceptible we are to this problem or this challenge, saying, well, things were just better when I was in high school, or things were better when this person or this thing or that was going on. One of the things that frustrates me when I think about this is that sometimes I'll talk to people from like the Woodstock generation. I'm not saying that derogatorily, not unnecessarily, but I'm saying like people will look at my generation and talk about how terrible things are with the youth right now. With my generation, millennials, or whatever the case may be, and say how horrible or what's going on, it's just worse than it's ever been. And the very people who lived through like Woodstock and all these things, these like crazy times as well, the president back then, all these things we can look back on with history and look back and take a perspective and say, well, things weren't so peachy back then either. But what's interesting is that I think the older we get, we just start to lose perspective necessarily and all the truth of what was going on then too. And maybe that's why he just simply puts it this way. Don't say that because it's not from wisdom that you ask about that. It's just kind of like, doesn't give much of an explanation. It just says it's not wise to be thinking about how much better things used to be. Because first of all, it may not be true, it probably isn't. But even if it were true, what would that prove? What good would that do you today to know that things were better 10 years ago? In some senses, I hope that it's not true. This verse always reminds me of, not an old person, but a kid that I was with one time who, it had been a year since they had been to Krispy Kreme, and they wanted to get strawberry milk with their donuts. And I know this sounds foolish, but stick with me because I think it perfectly articulates this. And his mom told him, said, no, you got that last year and you didn't like it. And he says, no, I don't think that's true. I think I got the strawberry milk last year. I think I like it. And he was very persistent to the point where his mom said, fine, I'll get you the strawberry milk. So we sit down at the table, the kid is eating his donuts and drinking his strawberry milk, and he says, wow, I really love this strawberry milk. And it's like, all right, that's good. And a couple minutes go later, and he starts to say, if I plug my nose while I drink it, I can't taste it. And he says, like, positively. And it's like, all right, that's interesting. I thought you liked it. And a few minutes go on, and he says, Mommy, I really don't like this strawberry milk. And just in that moment, I thought that's a perfect articulation of how we can be. If we could actually go back and live in the past that we think is so great, that in our minds is just the glory days. If we could go back and actually live in that time, we realize that time was fraught with difficulty, with sadness, with challenges that we're not facing now. We figured out a lot of things now that we didn't have figured out then. And regardless, it's just not from wisdom that we look back and say, well, man, things were so much better back then. So we got to quit living that way and thinking that way and saying those things. But go on in chapter 7, Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 11. It says, wisdom along with an inheritance is good, and an advantage to those who see the sun. For wisdom is protection, just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the lives of its possessors. Consider the work of God. For who is able to straighten what he has bent? In the day of prosperity, be happy. But in the day of adversity, consider, God has made the one as well as the other, so that man will not discover anything that will be after him. In the middle of this book of wisdom, he starts to pontificate about the value of wisdom. I always think it's a little funny when the wisdom writers talk about how great wisdom is. It's like, we get it, we're reading your books, but that's a whole other thing. But he goes on to say, wisdom is this great thing. It's like an inheritance. It's protection. And he says at the end of verse 12, the advantage of knowledge and wisdom is that it preserves the lives of its possessors. That's such a great definition of why wisdom is important. Wisdom is a life preserver. It's a life enhancer. It really gives your life more, not value, that's the wrong way to put it, but it gives it more fullness. And the next thing he says after the beauty and the greatness of wisdom, he says, so consider the work of God. Who is able to straighten what he has bent? This is one of the greatest bits of wisdom. Maybe it's overly simple, but one of the difficulties we always face is, well, what can I do and what is God doing? How can I interact with what God has done? And he makes a very fine point about this, I think, in verse 14. Who is able to straighten what God has bent? And so when you have a good day, be happy. And when you have a bad day, an adverse day, consider. Ecclesiastes 7:14, it has to be one of my favorite verses that I think about all the time. Because this point in this perspective of how valuable wisdom is, how much it enhances your life, how much it prospers your life, is that if you can get this into your head that you can't change the day. You can't change all the circumstances of your life. You can't change all of the details, the hand you were dealt that would make your day good or bad. Sometimes you just wake up on the wrong side of the bed and it's not going to be a good day. And we largely sometimes cannot change that. And yet we spend so much of our life trying to change those things, don't we? This is one of the things that wisdom tries to teach us, I believe, that wisdom tries to help us to really disregard the things that we have no ability to really change. We can't fix all the things that are broken. There's another verse like this in Ecclesiastes where it says, what is broken cannot be fixed and what is lacking cannot be numbered. Again, bleak. But also super important to appreciate that we can't even number all the things that are going wrong, so we just need to focus on the things we can focus on. We can't change the days, so what's the wisdom for me today? Well, today the wisdom is, if it's a prosperous day, be happy. Well, that's obvious, right? I mean, of course I'm going to enjoy a good day. Well, is it that obvious? How many happy days, how many prosperous days do you think you've ruined? How many happy, prosperous days have you ruined because you were working too much or you were too busy? When you had the opportunity to spend time and relax and be with people, but you chose to work instead. How many good days, prosperous days did you not enjoy because you were envious? No matter how many good things came your way, no matter how much you accumulated, no matter how much good was going on for you, you thought, well, I don't have what he has. I don't have what she has. I need more. I want this. I want that. I haven't gotten this yet. And you've whittled away another happy day. What about just being having ingratitude? How many prosperous days have we ruined because we weren't grateful for what we had? We had all these good things, but we didn't even appreciate that they were good. The Israelites certainly made that mistake, didn't they? God took them out of slavery and freed them, emancipated them, and all they could think about was, well, we want to be back in Egypt. And they grumbled and they complained. What about maybe we feel undeserving, that we've done so much wrong, or we just kind of get this guilty feeling or conception of ourselves that we don't deserve to have good days, so we can't enjoy them. Or tied to that, maybe we're just worried that I can't enjoy today because there's going to be another shoe that's going to drop. What about tomorrow? What about all the things that this week I haven't prepared? I haven't done this, I haven't done that. I haven't gotten this in order, so I can't enjoy this happy day. How many prosperous days have we not enjoyed because we found an excuse not to enjoy them? The wisdom of Ecclesiastes 7:14 is simple, but it's also kind of slaps us in the face and says, hey, look, when there's a good day, make sure you enjoy it. And if enjoying prosperous days is hard enough, I think making days of adversity, making them and using them for something good is even harder. Look what he says. So in the day of prosperity, be happy, but in the day of adversity, consider. Well, what do I consider, preacher? What am I supposed to consider? Consider this, that God has made one as well as the other. And consider that he did that so that man will not discover anything that will be after him. You know, one of the very things that makes us unable to enjoy the good days is why God gave us good days and bad days. In God's wisdom, he's made it mysterious that some days are going to be good, some days are going to be bad, and we really have to play loose in the batter's box to know what's going to be what. But if you're finding yourself in a day that's full of adversity, no matter what you do, it's a hard, difficult, bad day for you. Don't squander that either. Even the adverse days are a gift from God. You know why? Because God gave that to you so that you might learn. So that you might learn to appreciate that you're not in control of your life. That you might learn to appreciate that you can't tell the future. The meteorologist says snow tomorrow, but maybe, maybe not. You can't know whether or not this week's going to be good or bad, how well you're going to do in your work or your school this week. You don't know. The bad days are given by God to a certain extent to help us appreciate how much we need to rely on Him, because I can't rely on myself. It's not just that we can't see the future. The days of adversity are given so that we really will stop trying to discover everything that's going to be after us. This wisdom is so great because it gives us a purpose or something to do with every day of our lives. Is it a good day? Simple, enjoy it. Is it a hard day? All right, not as great. But use this day to meditate and to consider and to be introspective and to reevaluate your relationship with God again. And use it to grow closer to Him rather than just to pity yourself and think how bad my life is. Maybe it is. I know everyone, plenty of us, all of us have plenty to be that is adverse to us. But instead of playing the victim, how about we use a hard day for good, to grow closer to God and to consider the purpose and the value of our life. All of these verses, to me, find their perfect articulation from the mouth of Jesus in Matthew chapter 6. This is the last thing I want to look at. This is what I want to think about this week, to live this weekend. Look here in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 31. And this is, again, it's not the full context of what he's saying. You'll need to read this for yourself this week. But it is the conclusion of what Jesus is saying in this section. And he says in Matthew 6 and verse 31, "Do not worry then, saying, what will we eat? Or what will we drink? Or what will we wear for clothing?" And just stop there. Those are big questions. Like, those aren't just a small thing. It's not like they're trying to decide, do I wear the blue socks or the red socks? They're trying to decide, well, am I going to have clothing this week? Am I going to eat this week? That's what he's saying. Well, don't worry about that, Jesus says. Verse 32, "For the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." That's true, isn't it? That each day brings enough trouble with it to deal with. And yet what Jesus is talking about, and the people he's talking to us, is that we constantly try to bring as much trouble into today as we can. You know, the older people who are looking to the past are bringing the troubles of the past to today. And the young people, as we look to the future and we're so unsure about the future, we bring the troubles of the future into today. And today is more than enough trouble of its own, and we still try to bring more trouble into it. And then we ultimately feel overwhelmed. How can I handle everything in my life? How can I handle what's put on my plate? How can I handle all the circumstances of my difficult life? And I know that's true for a lot of us. But it would be a lot easier if we didn't bring more trouble into it, wouldn't it? It's interesting, Jesus isn't saying that these worries are inconsequential or that they don't matter or that they're not real. He says, I know, God knows you need these things. He's not saying there's nothing to worry about, which I think is sometimes how we read this verse. Like, oh, no, don't worry about those things. Don't worry about eating. It's just not that big of a deal. He's not saying that. But instead, Jesus is putting forth a hypothesis for our very life. That if instead of just trying to worry about all these things and just take care of our worries, He instead gives us an alternative worry. Singular, one thing to worry about. Worry about God. And don't worry about Him, actually seek Him. Instead of worrying, instead of busying yourself with worrying about this and that and all these earthly things, as big or as small as they may be, instead of getting all this trouble into today and trying to fix it all today and figure it all out and plan it all out and really get everything established today, instead of that, your first priority for today, and if we live tomorrow, your first priority for tomorrow is to seek first thing, seek God and His righteousness in your life. Do that first. And you know what the hypothesis is that Jesus gives us? What does He say will happen if we do that? Everything else will be added to you. That's not just a nice thought. Those are real words. That's a promise by God. That if we really do focus first on his kingdom and his righteousness, his goodness, his character, his divine nature in my life, if I am really enwrapped in that first and foremost, that everything else will fall into place. What he's saying is focus on the biggest, most difficult, most challenging task that God has placed squarely on your shoulders for you to do with your life. And the rest will work out. It will. Life is a gift from God. And I think when life isn't fair and when life seems too stressful or life seems too challenging or bad things come our way, we get the bad news we didn't want to get. The good news didn't come when we needed it to. The job didn't come through, or the school didn't come through, or the person we wanted to didn't come through for us, and all the things start falling apart around us. We start to think, well, man, life just isn't what I wanted it to be. One of the amazing things that God does for us as he's in control is he gives us, in our value of control, or our amount of control, he gives us this ability to say, all right, Ben, if you focus on me, if you really give your all to seeking me, to seeking my kingdom and my righteousness first and foremost, then I promise to take care of everything else for you. Isn't that a beautiful promise? In his wisdom, we can take each day with its good things or its bad things, and we can find value in them. And more than anything, he can give us, his promises give our days meaning. That I'm seeking God and his kingdom in this world so that I can further his purposes, and he'll take care of the rest for me. That's what we do with today. And if God grants it to each of us, that's what you'll do with tomorrow. And as we take care of each day as it comes, God does the rest, the planning, all the intricacies, all the things we can't predict. God makes them all work out for good for those who love him. It's a big promise. And it's an hypothesis that we can only see if it's true if we try it ourselves. And so let's try it. We don't have any better ideas, and we don't have anyone more trustworthy to follow after than God's wisdom. So tomorrow, today, any day we get, take care of it and seek God's kingdom and his righteousness first. And all those things, everything else will be added to you.